Andrew, no! Grab a blanket, turn off your lights for scary stories that happen with guys named Andrew. Stranger online knows more about me than he should. I was recently reminded of the story after telling it to some friends. This happened around 2011 when I was still in high school. At the time, I really enjoyed PC gaming and eventually started getting into a specific MMORPG. I wasn't really good at it, but wasn't playing to make friends or anything, only joining parties when absolutely necessary. For a few months, I just logged on and played some quests and did the usual thing. Because it was so long ago, excuse that I can't remember all the game-specific terminology. Now, if I remember correctly, the game worked as follows. Some areas like cities or towns were public spaces, so when there you would be able to interact with other people also currently in their respective gameplay. If someone wasn't actually in your party, you would have no contact with them when entering into a private space outside. One day, when moving about in one of the public areas, I was approached by another player. We'll call him Andrew. Just chatting to me, he was friendly and I really don't sense any red flags. It was a very standard interaction, but also probably one of my first that wasn't quest related. Andrew was friendly and offered to help me whatever I needed to do in the game next. At some point, he just randomly asked whether I'm really a girl. My avatar was a female, but my username didn't really offer any information relating to my gender, so I confirmed, albeit confused, that I am a girl, and that seemed to be it. We continued on from there, did the quest, and after adding him as a friend, I logged off eventually. Everything seemed fine. A few days later, I played again with what I assume must have been a newfound confidence and my friend-making skills thanks to Andrew. I did a quest with some other people who offered to let me join their guild. I was sort of stoked because I never had a guild offer before, so I immediately accepted and joined their guild. Even though it was tiny and unimportant, I was happy. The next day I log in and Andrew is also online. Playing the game publicly showed your guild affiliation and he's immediately angry, I guess. He reprimands me that I shouldn't join just any guild and demands I leave the guild because he wanted me to join his guild instead. I'm very confused but feel like I've somehow betrayed my friend, so I do as he asked and he accepts his invitation to join his guild. Though I felt bad for just immediately dropping my previous guild, I do cheer up a bit when I know that Andrew's guild is rated insanely high. Next time I log in is where things start to get weird. Just to clarify, I'd never exchanged any personal information with Andrew. All he knew about me is that I identify as female. Not only did I value my privacy in-game, and I never exchanged any personal information with anyone on there, I never posted on any public forum about the game, never joined a game-related group, and I hadn't even liked it on Facebook. As far as I know, there was no way to link me to my account, but I log in and Andrew greets me in the chat by my full name and surname. Now, my username was not related to my actual name, and I never told him anything personal about myself, including my name and surname, so I was very confused. However, I assume perhaps since I haven't been playing that long, I just didn't totally understand all the mechanisms of the game, and perhaps my name was available somewhere. His messages became weirder, more invasive, and sexual. I remember him specifically saying, "I can't not live knowing what it feels like to touch your skin," followed by many more messages of him speculating what I must feel and smell like. I log off and have no idea what to do. Stupid as I am, I decide to try and freak him out, so I do some snooping on my own. I remember all I did was look up the guild's Facebook group, and I think he was one of the admins. He was the guild leader, I believe, so it wasn't hard. At this point, I didn't know his full name yet either, but it was easy to figure out. Let's say his username in game was Ancrew, just one letter off from the admin called Andrew. Next time I logged back into the game, he was online as well. Once again, he greets me by my full name and my surname. I respond with the same since I now know what his name and surname is. However, he is unfazed. He responds by asking me how many things are in my neighborhood and at my school by naming them both. He knows where I live and where I go to school. I immediately log off, uninstalled the game, and have never been back. I still don't know how he got that information since it wasn't publicly available anywhere. I still have his full name and surname and checked his Facebook a while back out of sheer curiosity. He's a professor at a university of science and technology. Andrew. I'll start this by saying I'm a 29-year-old female from a small town in northern Tennessee. The kind where everyone knows everybody. and the kind where you have to drive 30 minutes to an hour to a job that pays a living wage. So when my father started his new job around 9 years ago, he found out he was working at the same place as a friend he knew growing up, Andrew. I'll also tell you that I was bullied a lot growing up, so I took compliments as jokes mostly. When I first met Andrew, he would compliment me and tell me how pretty I was. I was 20 years old at the time, and I always thanked him for the kind words. As time went on, the compliments got more intense. He would say he loved to be with a woman my size. I always laughed it off and never said anything about it. This went on at company picnics and holiday parties I went to with my father for about 4 years' time. Then I got a job with the same company in the same department as Andrew. Things were okay, I guess. For the first 3 months that he trained me, he still complimented me daily and I thanked him for the compliments. After my training, I went to night shift and only saw him for the 30 minutes of overlap per shift. Then 7 months into the job, my boyfriend and I broke up. Andrew was sympathetic at first, then became a different person. His compliments became more focused on my body and not my face. He would stare at certain parts of my body while speaking to me and cock his head to the side while standing behind me if I bent down to pick something up. As a woman in a predominantly male work environment, I was used to being stared at, but this was excessive. When I became single, he would also ask me about my sexual history, my preferences in the bedroom, if I'd be with a man of his age, early 50s, or a man of his size, 5 foot and over 300 pounds. He'd become frustrated when I told him no. Declining everything he asked me never stopped him. He just upped his game. He started talking about me and my body to other people at work and asking them questions about me or trying to get them to ask me the questions he wanted answers to. He did this numerous times to my best friend, who we'll call Jay for privacy reasons, I guess. Luckily for me, Jay just so happened to have a massive crush on me. He'd never do anything Andrew asked of him, and he always told me everything Andrew said or asked. This continued on for around 8 months, and then Andrew came to night shift. So my 30 minutes with him became 8 hours. He would start telling me all his sexual history, unprompted. The questions, comments, and staring never stopped. To give you a small example, this man asked me if he won the lottery, would I sleep with him for money? I said no. He offered me $1,000 one time to have sex with him, and I said no. I told him there is no amount of money in the world to make me sleep with him. He got mad at that. He asked for nude pictures, which I said no to. He'd asked Jay to try to sleep with me and take pictures and videos. He also said no. This all led to me being constantly stressed out and always looking over my shoulder to see if he was staring at me when I had to bend over to pick something up or if I had to reach for something. I am a very petite woman, and all my work clothes at the time were about two sizes too large, so you couldn't see my body shape at all. I did that to try and make him stop staring, but it did not matter. He still did. I stopped talking to him. I stopped being in his vicinity, but he continued. His comments were just to other people in the building, mainly Jay. It came to a breaking point one week when my supervisor told me that my department had to work one weekend alone. Just Andrew and myself on our shift. I begged him not to make me come in. I told him I would call out and take a point or whatever I had to. I told him how scared I was to be alone with that man. I told him no man should be alone with a building with this size with a woman, period. He listened and canceled the overtime. He made sure I was never alone with Andrew without a third person around. I finally broke down and told HR about all of it. They turned out to be a waste of time. It continued for 6 more months, but thankfully I was on medical leave for surgery for 2 of those months. Then in November last year, the right person on my shift heard me crying and complaining to Jay about everything before going home one night, and it complained to HR on my behalf. They finally opened an investigation. They asked me a ton of questions, and my answers filled up like 2 notebook pages, front and back, from just the comments and questions from him over 3 years. They asked Jay a ton of questions, and a few other people who worked around us, and 3 days later, he was finally let go for harassment. He threatened me the day they put him on suspension for the investigation, and he was banned from company property unless he wanted to be arrested. I filed a no contact order against him and haven't heard from him in over a year. Jay finally told me that Andrew had admitted to him at one point shortly before he was let go that if he ever got me alone, he was going to rape me and do ungodly things to me and then just leave my body somewhere in the wilderness. So I'm extremely grateful to my supervisor for not letting that happen to me. I had to type this out twice to get my thoughts in order. But the thing that bothers me a lot about all of this, Andrew had a daughter a year younger than me, and she had nothing to do with him when I knew him. I can't help but wonder what abuse he possibly put her through growing up. It's been over a year since this all came to an end. I'm no longer scared at work. I'm not on edge or stressed out. I'm not living in baggy-ass clothes anymore. But as long as Andrew is living and breathing in my hometown, I will not live there. And he's made a lot of enemies in that small town because of this. That happens in small towns when your parents know everyone, including the sheriff. Oh, and about Jay, his massive crush paid off and now we're dating. I've never felt safer with anyone in my life, so Andrew, the pervert who made my life hell for 3 years, let's never meet again. And any other girl or woman who is being harassed at work, don't be afraid to speak up. I promise you, it's worth it to tell someone. Pervy guy at work and useless HR department. 17 or so years ago, I worked IT for the large local hospital in my city. We also provided IT services to 7 other smaller hospitals in towns across the whole of our county and the neighboring county. My job was to build, install, and fix computers and provide support in person and via phone email to our 6,000 users. It was an incredibly stressful job, made even worse because I was the only person on the IT staff who lived in the city where the main hospital was located, so I was often on call after business hours too. When I began there, I was straight out of university and very, very young. As I had graduated high school much younger than most kids do, I was also very shy and rather anxious. While I was unquestionably geeky and awkward, I am autistic, high-functioning autism, so my social awareness and skills are rather poor. I was still young and reasonably cute. I would never have been called beautiful, as I was plain and a bit overweight, but I was cute, I guess. I dress in loose, baggy, masculine clothing, and do not wear makeup at all despite being female, as I have sensory problems that make fitted clothes and the oily feel and scent of cosmetics very hard to tolerate. So yeah, not exactly a runway model. I was in my very early 20s when this happened, but my shyness and immature social skills made me seem like a young teen than an adult. I'm also asexual, someone who does not experience sexual attraction or sexual needs, so I chose not to date. The hospital where I worked at was going through some repairs and upgrades, one of these being the replacement of the antiquated HVAC system in the main building on the hospital campus. They brought in a major company to access the hospital's needs, choose an appropriate system, and install it. This meant that one of the representatives from that company would be present at the hospital daily. He was given an office beside that belonging to the head of hospital maintenance, and I was directed to get him a computer and set him up on the network. When I got to this office and began installing the computer, things started getting weird. This was the first time I'd even met the man, who I will call Andrew here, for the sake of my own safety and privacy. This guy was at least 20 years older than I was, rather reedy looking due to being very tall and quite thin, and very average in appearance, your typical forgettable middle-aged man. But he would not take his eyes off me. Now, being autistic, I am naturally very uncomfortable with eye contact, especially the prolonged sort, and this man was just openly staring at me as I worked. He introduced himself as Andrew X and began asking me innocent work-related questions, but these soon morphed into very personal inquiries that had nothing to do with work, like where I lived, whether I had a boyfriend, that sort of a thing. I told him that I lived in the same city as the hospital, but not exactly where, as I actually lived right across the road from the hospital and didn't want him to know that. I lied and told him that I had a long-term boyfriend too. Any questions that veered in the direction of dating or romance got a curt, uninviting, bald-faced lie as an answer. I was also getting very uncomfortable at this point, but I didn't react as I would now. Nowadays, I would tell a guy asking that sort of question that it was none of his damn business. Back then, I was very uncertain, petrified of confrontation, and afraid to make any sort of complaint about anything, so I just kept working. I ended up having to sit down at his desk to install the correct software accesses, and while I was seated, he walked up behind me. I thought he's just watching what I'm doing to access the program he needs. Nope. He put his hands on my shoulders and began to massage them. I froze, stiffening up. "You're as stiff as a board," he says, as he kept kneading my shoulders. "All full of knots." Yeah, well, if I hadn't already been tense and bothered by his intrusive questions, I most certainly was after he began touching me. It is very common for autistic people to deeply dislike being touched. I tried to squirm out of his grasp, afraid to tell him to stop directly, as we were in a rather secluded, untraveled part of the hospital's basement, and I was afraid to make a scene and anger him. I hurried through getting everything done, told him to call our help desk if he needed any other help, and practically ran out of his office. I should have told HR right then and there, but I didn't. It was creepy, yeah, but I didn't think HR would be any help. It was so borderline, I thought, just treading the edge of inappropriate, I guess. I did tell my boss that Andrew made me uncomfortable, but my boss forgot about it nearly immediately. Fast forward a couple weeks, I was working in the medical imaging department installing some terminals in the CT scan suite. I was visible from the hallway. Andrew passed, walking with two other men from building maintenance. As soon as he saw me, he began loudly telling his companions that I was cute, I was pretty, I was sexy, I was smart, etc., laying it on thick. He walked past again and again, loudly praising me and saying he wanted to date me every time he went by. Ugh. The two men he was with knew me a little and could tell that I was bothered and embarrassed by this guy's inappropriate behavior. Finally, I finished up and ran back to the safety of my own department. Another week passed, and I was heading home late. I was using the underground tunnel behind the main building, and a smaller one used for solely administrative offices. It was a long tunnel, passing below a busy road, and I often took this route going home, as the smaller building was very close to my apartment complex. At that moment, I heard someone call my name and turned to find Andrew, hurrying up to catch up to me. It was after hours, and the corridor was otherwise totally empty. I did not want him finding out that I lived right beside the hospital. I turned and ran, hearing him call my name over and over again. Being young, I was faster, and I managed to find a good hiding spot inside the admin building without him knowing where I had gone. I had hidden myself in a network hub closet, behind the tall rack of network equipment. I had locked the door behind me, thankfully, as I heard him walk up that hallway, trying the doorknobs of locked offices, calling my name as he proceeded. He jiggled the door of the hub closet as he went by. I remained there, silent and still, long after I heard his last yell. After I was sure he was gone, I snuck out and raced home. Things calmed down for a bit after that. A few months went by without me having any contact with him at all, though I still see him around the halls of the hospital more often than I thought I should. I vaguely wonder if he was trying to follow me, but there was no other conclusive enough reason for me to prove it one way or the other. Then came the scariest part. I was working in a part of the hospital that had been patient rooms, but had been remade into offices. I had to pull network drops into these offices to allow computers to access the network. I lost track of time while I worked, and the other people working there with me, painters and the men setting up the new desk, went home without me noticing. Eventually, I was completely alone. When I happened to glance at my watch, it was almost 6:30 in the evening. I usually left at 5:30. I packed up my tools and left the room where I'd been working. I stepped out into the long hallway, tired and thinking about what I would make for supper. I hadn't gone very far when I heard footsteps approaching and looked up. There was Andrew, hurriedly walking towards me. I hoped that if I switched to the other side of the hallway, he'd rush on past, as he did seem to be hurrying. No such luck. He veered over to me, grabbed me hard by the biceps, and forced me up against the wall. He then proceeded to pin me there with his body while he groped my breasts hard, easily pushing away my hands as I punched and slapped, trying to get him off of me. For a thin man, he was surprisingly small. He leaned down so that his face was close to mine, and I thought in horror, oh god no, he's going to kiss me. So I twisted my neck and turned my face as far from his fetid breath as was possible. Instead, he growled into my ear, "Normal girls like it when a guy wants them. Normal girls like guys date them." All the while I was yelling, "No, no, no!" Finally, my brain got itself out of the freeze mode and I became angry. I shoved him hard, and once I had enough space to make the move, I kneed him hard in the groin. He doubled over, wheezing, moaning. I ran and locked myself into one of the rooms I'd been working in. The doors were solid hardwood, and the locks were strong, so I knew I would be safe despite him starting to pound and kick the door. Only one problem. I had no way to call for help. I didn't carry the on-call phone during the daytime, didn't own my own mobile phone, and back then, mobile phones weren't really allowed in hospitals anyways, and none of the rooms that were being renovated in the offices had telephones installed yet. I was trapped, and my only way to call for help would be opening the window and yelling out. Meanwhile, Andrew pounded on the door, kicking the locked door, screaming insults, and over. 5 minutes passed, then 10, and he was still beating and battering the door, slamming hard against it with his full weight. I began to fear that I might be trapped there all night, with him on the other side of the door trying to break inside. I don't know what finally made him give up. Maybe he heard someone approaching or something like that. Suddenly, the yelling and bang at the door suddenly stopped completely, and I was left in there breathless, silent. I remained there, listening at the door, trying to detect the very telltale signs of rustling of clothes or squeaks of a shoe that would tell me he was still out there waiting for me to open the door. Nothing! Just sweet, lovely, safe silence. I slowly undid the lock, then inched the door open and peered outside. No one. He was gone. Finally. I knew he might be hiding out of my view in another office, but I had to do something. I could have just stayed holed up in that office for the next 14 hours or so. Knowing it was a risk, I bolted for the stairwell and raced down to my apartment. I felt safe there, as my workspace was in the code access controlled server room, and only my coworkers and I knew the combinations needed to get inside. Only one other person was still inside the department, the woman who handled the help desk calls. I began to cry the second I saw her, as she frantically asked me what was wrong. She held my hands as I told her what had just happened, and she was the one who convinced me to report Andrew to HR. I knew that HR would be empty at that hour, so I sent them an email rather than calling. Then I went home and became a little ball of tears, worried, anxiety, and horrified nausea. I called in sick the next day. HR staff called me at home that afternoon, and I reiterated all that I had already told them in my email, how he had been kind of inappropriate from day one, and how things had escalated so horribly. The HR director asked me to come in and write out a formal complaint form, which I did. Because Andrew didn't work directly for the hospital itself, it was difficult for HR to handle this, I guess. They did contact the company he worked for, but he was not fired or even transferred to some other client's site. He was given a little slap on the wrist and was told never to come near me or attempt to communicate with me in any way. I still had to see the bastard at work nearly every day, and I felt very unsafe when my task took me away from my busy areas. This added to the stress of the job, and I began to suffer from stress-related medical problems like migraines, depression, anxiety. I felt very unsupported and unprotected by HR too. About 18 months after that event, I quit that job. So, Andrew, I hope your nasty ass is in jail. Let's never meet again.